So for problems like this, I like to start with a rectangle. Now, what kind of rectangle should I choose? I want to make sure I can represent 3/4 and 1/3 conveniently using my rectangle. So I go with the two denominators under consideration, 4 and 3. This 3, not that 3. I'm going to start with the two denominators, 4 and 3. I want to make sure my rectangle is 3 by 4. And we're going to soon find out why that's a convenient choice. So what I have here is a rectangle cut into equal parts. And this rectangle is a 3 by 4 rectangle. And it really doesn't matter how you orient your rectangle. I have 3 rows and 4 columns. You could have chosen a rectangle with 4 rows and 3 columns. It won't make any difference. So, according to the question, Mrs. Walsh gave her grandkids 3/4 of the cookies. So, according to the question, her grandkids ate 3/4 of the cookies she baked. So this is 3/4. Why is it 3/4? Well, take a look. If this is 1/4, I'm going to write it here. This is 1/4. And I have 4 copies of 1/4 that represents the whole, her entire tray. My 3 by 4 rectangle actually represents the entire batch of cookies that Mrs. Walsh baked. And you really want to make sure you understand how I'm representing 1/4. The blue rectangle is 1/4 because 4 copies of the blue rectangle will cover the entire whole. So that's why the blue rectangle is 1/4. If the blue rectangle is 1/4, what I've shaded is 3/4. So the green area represents what her grandkids ate. After the grandkids ate 3/4 of her cookies, she was left with these 3 pieces. And what did she do with them? Well, she gave 1/3 of the leftover cookies to her neighbor. And that's what we're going to do next. She gave 1/3 of the leftover cookies to her neighbor. So this much went to the neighbor. And these 2 pieces were left behind. And she was left with 20 cookies at the end. Therefore, these 2 squares must represent 20 cookies. And you do want to pause here and really reflect and read the entire question and try to understand what is being said. So our conclusion is these 2 tiny squares represent 20 cookies, and that would mean each square represents 10 cookies. And the question wants us to find out how many cookies Mrs. Walsh baked originally. Well, she baked a large batch and we used a 3 by 4 or a rectangle that is comprised of 12 squares to represent her entire batch. If each tiny square is worth 10 cookies, 12 such squares will be worth 12 times 10 or 120 cookies. So my answer is Mrs. Walsh originally baked 120 cookies.